Holloway Prison.
Mrs. Parker, when the police came to your house, why did you say, "I've been dreading this day since it happened"?
I knew the doctor was suspicious. I assumed he must have gone to the police.
What made you think he was suspicious?
The sort of questions he asked. How could I possibly have made a mistake like that? I did, that's all. You must believe me, I didn't mean to kill him.
We do believe you, Mrs. Parker. Miss Peterson's job is to persuade the jury. Now, you must tell her, just as you told me, everything that went through your mind.
Even if you only thought about killing him?
Oh, I thought about it more than once. I mean, wouldn't anyone? He was old, he was an invalid, and he was a sadist. He used to say I'd wasted the best years of my life looking after him. And he'd laugh when he said it. I suppose that doesn't help much, does it?
Mrs. Parker, part of my job is to inform you of the alternatives open to you. Now, this has nothing to do with whether I believe you or not.
You're going to say I'll get a lighter sentence if I plead guilty?
No. It would have to be life just the same. But with mitigating circumstances and a recommendation from the judge.
I won't admit to something I didn't do.
Of course not. No one would want you to.
Mr. Simpson said what matters is whether I intended to kill him. That's what they've got to prove, my intention.
Just a rough outline, you understand?
Perfectly right. Our best defense is that the prosecution simply cannot prove its case, unless they can show you had a strong enough motive.
I suppose Ronnie could be considered a motive.
Mrs. Parker, who is Ronnie?
Rosie, you are supposed to be typing the divorce petition, not reading the correspondence love letters.
Broadening my mind, Mr. Colletti.
Furthermore, they're confidential.
I'll bet. Sorry, Mr. Colletti.
Rosie? Ah, Rosie, vision of loveliness. How would you like 2 tickets to Jethro Tull in concert next Friday?
Fantastic.
Then I shall speak to a friend of mine the moment that you've typed out this lot in triplicate. I know, yes, but just close your eyes and think about Friday. No, on second thoughts, don't close your eyes. That's the way you normally do it. Typing.
I'll get on with it now.
No, you won't, not till you finish that divorce petition.
I have finished, Mr. Colletti. I was just clearing up.
Then what have you been hanging around for?
I had nothing else to do. I'll be about an hour, Mr. Eliot.
Fine, well, I'm going out, so just leave it on my desk, would you? There you are, you see, Bill. All done with kindness. You should try it sometime.
Oh, I might, sir. If I stop getting results my own way.
Yeah. Oh, Harriet. We can't go on meeting like this.
Can't go on. We've hardly begun. Put me down, James. I'm in a filthy mood.
Anything wrong, Miss Peterson?
Only that I've had to drive up and down Fleet Street and along the embankment and twice up every street in between looking for somewhere to park.
Oh, I know. It's a terrible bore, isn't it? I shall be back before tea, Bill, if I'm wanted. Bye, Harriet.
Right you are, sir.
Any messages?
2 calls. I've made a note. Couldn't the attendant help you?
He offered to park it for me, but I couldn't afford the bride. Bill, do you know anyone with a white Italian sports car? You can see it from the window, parked right across my space.
Yeah, well, it could be somebody just visiting. Miss Peterson, look at this. Well.
Well, that's one question answered.
Yeah, I'll have a word with him.
Oh, forget it, Bill. He's as much right to park his car there as I have. I should get myself a numbered bay like Sir John.
Yeah, but that's the chamber space, Miss Peterson. As number 2, you should take priority, not the over-familiar Mr. Eliot, who's only just joined us.
Mr. Eliot is not the kind of young man to take instructions on where to park his car. Remember, he earns more than any of us.
Excepting Sir John.
Always excepting Sir John. Have you heard from him, by the way?
Just this rather rude postcard from Inverness.
Do you think it possible he didn't see the joke?
More than likely, I'd say.
Still, I wish he were coming back today instead of next week.
Problems?
Come in a minute, Bill. Let me bounce it off you and see how it sounds. Or what I should say is, give me the benefit of your experience.
That's much the same thing.
You know the conference I had this morning?
Mrs. Parker.
It seems the doctor is going to insist he gave her full warning that the combination of certain foods, including cheese, with the drugs he prescribed for her husband could prove fatal.
Yeah, but surely the husband knew that too.
The doctor claims he only warned the wife. I'm pretty sure we can shake his story. He'd already signed the death certificate before the police became involved, which means he wasn't sure enough of his ground to cause trouble.
Well, then how did the police come into it?
2 weeks after the funeral, a detective inspector appeared on Mrs. Parker's doorstep and asked very politely if he could have a word about her late husband. Actually, he'd only come about a subscription to some police charity, but Mrs. Parker, already rattled by the doctor's attitude, jumped to the wrong conclusion. She thought the doctor must have made a report after all. She panicked and said, "I've been dreading this day since it happened." From then on...
Quite. Still, not much of a case.
Unless the police discover what I discovered this morning. For the past 12 months, Mrs. Parker has had a lover, one Ronnie Manners, all very discreet, an associate of her husband's who used to come to the house. The first thing she did with the 20,000 she inherited was give 5,000 to him to pay off a gambling debt.
Oh.
My own feelings, precisely.
But the police don't know?
Apparently not.
Well, at least she believes in full disclosure to her own side. That's something.
Trouble is, under cross-examination by even halfway decent counsel...
Yes, I see what you're thinking.
Do I put her in the witness box or not?
That's not a decision that I envy you, Miss Peterson.
I very nearly missed the train.
Obviously couldn't contain your excitement.
Let me tell you, I've had a murderous day.
Funny you should say that.
You don't want to start talking shop, are you? Why, Harriet, you look amazingly like, what's the word? A woman.
Didn't you know it was fancy dress?
I heard that.
Heard what?
Your smile freezing over, a sort of distant creaking sound.
It certainly wasn't the starch in your shirt front. There isn't any.
It isn't supposed to be these days.
And where did you last wear this? At a cookery contest? Have you read Germaine Greer?
I never got beyond Mrs. Beeton.
First message of women's lib to the male chauvinist. Get your suits cleaned more often. Still, never mind. You look all right from a distance.
Thank you very much.
What on earth are you wearing on your face?
It is supposed to make me nice to be near.
Well, I dare say it's good for the sinuses.
Oh. All right, game, set, and match. You do not look amazingly like a woman. You look wonderful. And the dress is sensational.
A compliment at last.
Simple and unqualified.
I had to fight for it.
You know how independent you are. If you don't have to fight for something, you don't want it.
How come you nearly missed your train?
Well, one of my partners, a junior partner, I might add, suddenly decided to stand in for a cousin at a christening or something. And that 10 days after I'd reorganized my timetable so I could be down here tonight. Well, we couldn't both be away, so I told him it was either him or me.
What did he say?
Well, I didn't wait to find out. Or I would have missed my train. Friend of yours?
In a way.
Very smooth. What does he do for a living?
You wouldn't believe it if I told you.
I haven't been sleeping, but they've given me something now. It helps a little, but I get these nightmares. If I make too much noise, the wardress comes in and wakes me. That's the worst part, waking up in this place.
I know what you're going through, Mrs. Parker, believe me.
It's the feeling that I'll never get out of here.
Come now, Mrs. Parker.
Just a number, a prison statistic. I've begun wondering how many people are there in prison who shouldn't be there, what it must be like for them. I've never thought about it before.
We have every confidence you're going to walk out of your trial a free woman. You don't have to think any further ahead than that.
Is that a promise, Miss Peterson?
Miss Peterson isn't here to make promises. She's here to give you the best advice you can possibly have.
I'm sorry.
The case against you is weak. It's circumstantial, uncorroborated, and full of loopholes. Remember, Mrs. Parker, it's up to the prosecution to prove their case against you, not for you to prove your innocence.
I know, I've seen it on television. Reasonable doubt, 12 just men and true. It seems a lot less convincing when you get this close. When you get the smell of this place and see the blank looks on people's faces.
I've given a lot of thought to our line of approach. Your instinct the other day was very sound. If the prosecution knew of your relationship with Mr. Manners and the money you've given him...
No one knows. It's impossible.
At least you chose to tell me, which was sensible.
Ronnie has nothing to do with all this. I don't want him involved in any way. That's why I told you. So you can make sure none of it comes out. If his employers knew...
I am every bit as anxious as you are to keep Mr. Manners out of it. You can imagine what prosecuting counsel would make of the story.
The perfect motive.
They'll be looking for anything they can use against you, hammering you with questions until your head spins. Under that kind of cross-examination, I don't think even you could keep Mr. Manners a secret for very long.
I hadn't thought of that.
There is one solution. Not to let them cross-examine you at all, by not putting you in the witness box.
You mean I wouldn't have to answer any questions?
It also means you have no chance to give evidence on your own behalf.
Is that important?
It's a decision I'd much rather make with your approval than without it.
I'm in your hands, Miss Peterson.
Then that is my decision.
I expect you'll want a signed statement from her saying she agrees with your decision not to call her.
No, that won't be necessary.
Not even to protect yourself in case the thing goes wrong?
Henry, that poor woman has enough on her mind without worrying about whether I trust the advice I've given her.
My car, you say, Bill?
Your car, sir.
What do you mean, yesterday?
Exactly, sir, yesterday.
Well, I shall be driving in every day now.
Which is why I feel we should clear the matter up now.
I don't see what there is to clear up, Bill.
I thought it was fairly straightforward, with all due respect, sir. Miss Peterson has been using that parking space ever since she joined the chambers.
Well, yes, but it's not a numbered bay, is it? I thought it was for the use of anyone in chambers.
Well, so it is, strictly speaking.
There you are, then.
Not quite, sir.
No?
I would have thought, sir, that you could have seen your way to making your own arrangements. As a matter of courtesy to Miss Peterson.
Did she ask you to say that?
Yes, sir, that's my own opinion.
Well, thank you, Bill, for giving me the benefit of it.
I realize, Mr. Eliot, that you joined these chambers at the direct invitation of Sir John Gallagher. Also that your earnings exceed those of anyone else, excepting only Sir John himself.
But
I merely want to remind you, sir, with all possible politeness, that Miss Peterson is still number 2 in these chambers, not you.
I see. Well, perhaps I had better remind you of something, Bill. I'm a member of these chambers. You are not. You are the clerk here. Your job is to look after the books. You do not issue instructions to members, and you do not interfere with matters which do not concern you. And you tender advice if, and only if, it is requested, at least when you are speaking to me. Now, have I made myself quite clear?
Afternoon, Bill. Hello, James. Am I interrupting something?
No, not at all. Bill and I were just having a chat. And where were you off to last night, looking so glamorous?
Regimental dinner.
Ah, very larky.
I must say, I've never seen you looking prettier.
Well, when duty calls.
This came by hand, Miss Peterson.
Thank you. What have you done with that expensive motor car of yours today?
I've gouged it around the corner. I made a booking for 12 months. I didn't want to be in anybody's way.
Great minds. I've just done the very same thing.
You mean that you haven't left it outside?
You didn't ask, did you, Bill?
Well, there's a nice empty space for someone. Can you spare a moment, James? I want to ask you something.
Yes, of course.
I'm back, Mr. Colletti.
On time for once.
Well, you see, I borrowed my sister's Mini today. And you wouldn't believe it, but I just found the perfect parking space right outside. I don't know why people say it's difficult to park around here. Is anything wrong, Mr. Colletti?
The Mitchell case?
As I remember, you handled it rather well, and without calling the defendant.
I still lost. All I could do was challenge the prosecution to prove their case and hope for the best.
You very nearly pulled it off.
Very nearly is a long way, but what's your sudden interest in Mitchell?
Something I have now, the Parker woman.
Ah, Harriet, just a moment. Before you spilled any more beans into my eager lap, there is something you must know. Whilst you were out this morning, I accepted a brief that was intended for Sir John to appear for the Crown against Parker. You don't look very alarmed.
Should I?
Well, if you had even the slightest regard for my ego, you might have flinched at the least.
Sorry, James. I always prefer the devil I know to the devil I don't. That way I know what to expect.
I see. Undermining my confidence. Very good, Harriet.
Fruits of experience. It'll come to you, James, in time.
Don't you worry. I shall get my own back before we start. After all, I am driving you up there, aren't I?
Are you?
Well, there's no point in taking 2 cars. And the trains are impossible.
All right, I accept. Thank you.
Well, that should leave you a nervous wreck for at least the following 48 hours.
Anyone who has been driven by Sir John Gallagher and lived has nothing to fear.
I can see I'm going to have trouble with you. Such evidence as I have outlined will leave you in common sense and in logic able to draw only one inescapable conclusion, that the accused, Mrs. Muriel Parker, knew precisely what she was doing when on that October afternoon she went out and purchased a quantity of Stilton cheese, intending to serve it to her husband for his supper that evening. Knew precisely what she was doing because she had been clearly warned by her husband's doctor that the combination of certain foods with the drugs he was taking might very well prove fatal. You will hear, too, of the accused's frustration, of the long, weary months and years in attendance at the bedside of a sick and elderly man, a man she had taken willingly 15 years earlier as her husband, but a husband whose life had become a burden, and her prison. The temptation proved too great. The opportunity of achieving her freedom through the one simple and seemingly innocent act, the purchase and the serving of a quantity of ordinary Stilton cheese, proved irresistible. And now, with your lordship's permission, I shall call my first witness, Dr. Norman Green, the Home Office pathologist.
The evidence of the post-mortem pointed quite conclusively towards an intracerebral bleed as the immediate cause of death. That is a stroke.
Now, Dr. Green, will you tell the court what evidence you found of how the stroke may have occurred?
My analysis of the stomach contents revealed that shortly before his death, the deceased had consumed a quantity of cheese. Now, the significance...
How much?
5 ounces. Not excessive. The deceased would have been in no discomfort from overeating.
Thank you, Dr. Green. Please continue.
You see, cheese contains a substance called tyramine, in itself, and to a normally healthy person, quite harmless. However, when this substance is combined with certain others, the picture changes dramatically. Now, my analysis further revealed that on the day of his death, Mr. Parker had taken something like 60 milligrams of phenelzine. Yes, I'll explain what that means. Phenelzine is an antidepressant drug. A patient taking that, or any similar drug, and who then consumes any substance including meat or yeast extract, wines or beers, certain proprietary medicines, or cheese, is liable to suffer a rapid elevation in blood pressure. Now, this would be accompanied by a severe headache, and very possibly by the kind of intracerebral bleed or stroke which was the cause of death in this instance.
What you were saying, Dr. Green, is that if the patient takes this drug,
Phenelzine,
and then one of the substances you listed,
in this case cheese,
the combination of the two would prove fatal.
or possibly fatal.
Was that the cause of death in this instance?
In my opinion, yes.
It's that awful journey in the police car every day. Holloway to here, here back to Holloway. It takes hours. Why can't I just stay here?
I'm afraid that isn't possible. For a man, of course, it's much easier. They can accommodate him locally. But Holloway is the nearest women's prison there is.
More unfairness to women.
Yes, something of the sort.
I am grateful for what you're doing, Miss Peterson. Coming down to see me and everything.
I'll look in again tomorrow morning before the court sits.
What's your room like?
Bearable. Yours?
Almost. I suspect there's a mouse caught in the central heating system.
Why, isn't he working?
The mouse? Oh, the system, yes. I suspect that's why the mouse is so noisy. What are you having?
Soup, I think, and then the lamb.
Ah, well, you can't go very far wrong with the lamb.
The famous last words.
You know, a friend of mine once ordered the sole here. He took one bite and called the waiter. What, he demanded, has the chef done to this sole? He's grilled it, sir, replied the waiter. Then take it back, said my friend. I think it's ready to talk.
Would you like to order now, sir?
I think I'd better. Yes, soup and smoked trout to begin with, then we're both having the lamb. And what was it? A bottle of...
7, wasn't it?
7, yes. Would you ask the wine waiter for a bottle of number 7, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Well, she seems a pleasant enough little lady, your Mrs. Parker.
She is.
Do you think she did it? Oh, come on, Harriet. I know you're not going to call her, so there must be something wrong.
You don't know anything of the sort.
Then why were you asking me about the Mitchell case the other day?
I don't have to decide whether or not I'm calling my client until I've heard the whole of your case, and from what I've heard so far, it's not going to be necessary.
Oh, come on, Harriet. Look, when counsel doesn't call a client, it's usually for one of a few reasons. Either she's guilty and you won't put her in the box to commit perjury.
That's very rare.
Or that you're afraid she might make an unfavorable impression on the jury. Except that I doubt that with your Mrs. Parker. I'd say she could bring a lump to the throat of a traffic warden on a wet Saturday. The third reason could just be that you're afraid that under cross-examination she might reveal something particular that would make a conviction certain.
3 choices. Well, you just have to take your pick, won't you?
I shall put my money on the last one.
Fascinating.
I shall winkle it out, whatever it is you're hiding. Dr. Lomax, you were Mr. Parker's personal physician.
Yes.
For how many years?
14, a little more, maybe.
Were you treating him at the time of his death?
I was.
For what?
Well, now, that's rather a long story. 12 years ago, at the age of 50, John Parker suffered a very severe heart attack. If he had taken my advice then, rest, diet, given up smoking, he might have made a reasonable recovery. But he was a man who always knew best. As a result, 8 years ago, he had a second attack, which left him almost a permanent invalid, unable to leave his house.
Did you prescribe various drugs to aid Mr. Parker's condition?
I did.
And did you at any time prescribe antidepressant drugs for Mr. Parker?
Yes.
When was the first time?
7 years ago.
And why did you?
The patient was depressed, that's the short answer.
Depressed by what?
By his condition, by being an invalid. He'd always been a very active man in the past. I tried him on several antidepressants, but with only limited success. Then recently, I tried him on one of a group of drugs, monoamine oxidase inhibitors.
In this case, the drug phenelzine.
That's right.
What was the dosage?
1 tablet of 50 milligrams 3 times a day. That's 45 milligrams in all.
Dr. Lomax, the post-mortem on Mr. Parker revealed that on the day of his death, he'd taken about 60 milligrams.
Yes, I know.
Oh, did that surprise you?
Not unduly. It had happened before.
How many times to your knowledge?
At least 3.
And for what reason?
The patient was more than usually depressed.
Dr. Lomax, do you know where these tablets were kept?
In a cupboard in Mrs. Parker's bathroom.
And were they accessible to Mr. Parker?
No, I advised his wife to keep them under lock and key. She measured out the daily dosage and in order to avoid mishaps.
So that if Mr. Parker had wanted an extra dosage, as on that last day of his life, he would have had to ask his wife for it.
That is so.
Dr. Lomax, did you warn Mrs. Parker of the danger to her husband of certain foods whilst he was taking this drug?
I did.
And in your opinion, did she understand that warning?
In my opinion, yes. I've made myself perfectly clear.
Dr. Lomax, what effect would an extra dosage of phenelzine, as on the last day of his life, have had on Mr. Parker in relation to these foods?
It would have increased the dangers considerably.
Dr. Lomax, was there ever any suggestion made that Mr. Parker should be transferred from his home to a hospital for more professional care?
Yes.
And from where did the suggestion come?
From Mrs. Parker.
Why? Did she say why?
She told me she was finding the strain intolerable.
And how did Mr. Parker react to that?
He became very angry. He told his wife twice in my presence that she was failing in her duty by even suggesting such a thing.
Her duty?
As his wife, he even refused trained help in the house.
And how did Mrs. Parker take that?
She was very upset. Once she actually broke down. I was very sorry for her. It was an intolerable burden.
Yes, yes. And of course she was very much younger than her husband,
My
wasn't she?
lord, that is comment of a most prejudicial kind from counsel.
Yes, Mr. Elliot, indeed it is.
I beg your lordship's pardon. I will withdraw the question. I have no further questions.
Miss Peterson, I imagine you have a number of questions to put to this witness.
Quite a number, my lord.
In that case, as I see it's nearly 4 o'clock, the court will rise till tomorrow morning.
Should get off.
You think so?
I have an instinct for these things. I also have a suspicion that you're planning to take that poor unfortunate doctor apart tomorrow.
I shall do my best.
Mrs. Tonic, Harriet?
Thank you.
Ian, you could do me a very great favor by keeping Harriet out extremely late tonight. I want her in no fit state for a fair contest tomorrow.
Are you sure you won't join us for dinner?
No, really, thank you very much, but I'm sure Harriet's seen enough of my face for one day. Besides, they're showing the Magnificent Seven at the local Roxy. I'll probably grab a hot... My God, if that's the timer. Please don't get up here. Oh, you did. Oh, well. I'll see you again soon, I hope.
I hope so.
See you in the arena, Harriet. Right.
Enjoy yourself.
I could swear I've met him somewhere before.
No, you've never met.
His face seems faintly familiar.
Regimental dinner. Outside the Hilton.
Oh.
Ian, are you sure today's your day off?
What do you mean?
You haven't dropped your partners in it again just to come over and take me out to dinner.
Okay.
Well, just so long as you're not... None of my business. Sorry, I didn't mean to interfere.
You don't have to worry about my partners. From what you've told me, I think you ought to worry about your own.
Dr. Lomax, there is one very particular question I want you to answer. Did it ever, at any time, cross your mind there was a serious possibility of Mrs. Parker's murdering her husband? Come now, Doctor, it's a straightforward question.
I must say that's hardly how it strikes me.
I am merely trying to determine, Dr. Lomax, whether a trained physician such as yourself would put the means of murder into the hands of someone he thought likely to commit it. And if so, why?
I wouldn't do a thing like that, of course not if I thought the conditions.
Dangerous?
Yes.
So you did not regard Mrs. Parker as a potential murderer?
Well, no.
You are quite certain of that?
Yes, quite certain.
Well, that is something at all events. Now, let us turn to the warning you say you issued on the dangers of the drugs you prescribed for Mr. Parker. You say you gave that warning to Mrs. Parker. Did you also give it to her husband?
No.
Why not?
Well, I've always considered it unwise to risk further depressing an already depressive patient by letting him think that a course of treatment was in any way unusual or dangerous.
I see. In order to preserve the patient's peace of mind.
Exactly.
Dr. Lomax, you maintain you gave Mrs. Parker full and clear warning of the dangers, the things her husband must not eat or drink.
I did.
Did you write that list of things down for her?
No.
Did Mrs. Parker ask you to?
It wasn't necessary. The chemist would supply the list when he handed over the drugs.
When Mrs. Parker told you the circumstances of her husband's death, what was your reaction?
I assumed that she had ignored my warning.
Ignored it deliberately?
Well, under the circumstances, it was hard to draw any other conclusion.
You mean in the circumstances it was hard to draw any conclusion other than that Mrs. Parker was a murderer? Dr. Lomax?
Well, yes.
Then why did you do nothing about it? Why, when confronted with evidence of what you took to be a murder, did you not inform the police instead of signing the death certificate as though satisfied your patient had died from natural causes?
My lord, it is the accused who is on trial here, not Dr. Lomax.
Precisely, Mr. Eliot. And the doctor's evidence is of central importance. Carry on, Miss Peterson.
Thank you, my lord. I'm still waiting for Dr. Lomax to answer my question. Why did you not inform the police of your suspicions?
It was none of my business to go around making accusations.
But you made it your business, did you not, to accuse Mrs. Parker of negligence?
Yes.
Negligence, Dr. Lomax, or premeditated murder? Of which did you accuse her?
I said she was outrageously careless or stupid or both. I don't know.
But you did not at that time accuse her of murder?
No.
Why not?
I had no reason to.
But you're accusing her of it now. What was it you said a moment ago? Hard to draw any other conclusion. Did you or did you not say that to this court?
Yes.
And yet you signed her husband's death certificate with no more than a protest of her about her carelessness. Yes or no, Doctor?
Yes.
Could that be because you were not at that time sure whether the warning you'd given Mrs. Parker was adequate? That you regretted your own negligence in not warning her husband, your patient, of the dangers?
No.
And that you decided Mrs. Parker was a murderer only after the police became involved? And you realized you yourself might be open to a charge of professional negligence in giving neither Mr. Parker nor his wife sufficient warning as to the dangers of the course of treatment you had prescribed?
My lord.
No further questions.
I am waiting for silence in this court before continuing. Thank you. I must remind the court that those sort of interruptions will not be tolerated. Mr. Eliot, you wish to re-examine your witness?
My lord. Dr. Lomax, did you give Mrs. Parker a full and clear warning as to the dangers connected with her husband's treatment?
I did.
And in your opinion, did she understand that warning?
She most certainly did.
Thank you, Dr. Lomax. I have no further questions.
Dr. Lomax, you may step down.
You shook him, Miss Peterson. I think you got the jury with you, too.
Let's hope so, Henry. What's going on there? James looks distinctly ruffled.
Mr. Eliot, if you've quite finished your consultation, perhaps you'd care to call your next witness.
I beg your lordship's pardon. I find myself somewhat in difficulties. I had intended calling Mrs. Miriam Glover, the daily cleaner to the Parkers. However, she has failed to appear.
Any explanation to offer the court, Mr. Eliot?
Well, apparently, my lord, she's managed to get herself on the wrong train, and she's gone to Bristol.
Got on the wrong train?
Yes, arrangements have been made to bring her here by car, but I fear she can't possibly arrive before the court rises.
An extraordinary piece of incompetence, Mr. Eliot, on somebody's part.
I can only apologize, my lord. In the meantime, with your lordship's permission, I shall call my next witness, whom I had intended calling after Mrs. Glover, the officer in charge of the case, Detective Inspector Collins.
Very well, I suppose you'd better. But after lunch, I think.
On November last at 11:35 in the morning, the door was opened by Mrs. Parker. I apologized for disturbing her and said I wanted to talk to her about her husband.
How did she react to that?
As though very shocked, and then saying, "I've been dreading this day since it happened."
Did you understand what she meant by that?
Not at that time, no, sir.
What did you do next?
I asked her what she meant.
And she replied?
She replied, "You think I killed my husband, don't you?"
She replied, "You think I killed my husband, don't you?" Inspector, would you tell the court why, in fact, you called on Mrs. Parker that day?
To inquire whether she wished to continue the financial support of a local charity, an orphanage the police run a concert for once a year. Her husband had promised to support it just before he died. It was only right she should be given the opportunity of withdrawing.
You did not go to ask any questions about her husband's death?
No, sir.
Nor did you attempt to lead her into any self-incriminating statements as to the
Hopefully, my lord, not as the prosecution is at present leading this witness.
Quite, Miss Peterson. Mr. Eliot, you know better than that, though you'd sometimes have us disbelieve it. Inspector, you will ignore that question.
My lord.
My lord. Inspector, did you eventually obtain an exhumation order on the body of Mr. Parker?
I did. 19 days after the funeral.
Did you speak to anyone other than Mrs. Parker before doing so?
I did, to Dr. Lomax, and of course to Mrs. Glover.
My lord, Mrs. Glover...
Is the witness who got on the wrong train? Yes, I'm aware of that, Mr. Eliot.
Yes, my lord. I have no further questions.
Miss Peterson?
Inspector, we have heard the evidence of Dr. Lomax, though we have not as yet had the privilege of hearing from Mrs. Glover. Would you not agree that Dr. Lomax's evidence amounted to nothing more than simple suspicion of Mrs. Parker's motives?
I would not have put it that way.
No? Then let us try putting it this way. You went to see Dr. Lomax after your suspicions had been aroused by what Mrs. Parker said to you when you called on her.
I did.
And what you are saying is that Dr. Lomax confirmed your suspicions.
You could say that.
So you had nothing in your hands but a web of suspicion and straightforward gossip, nothing in the nature of evidence. And had it not been for the ambiguous nature of Mrs. Parker's remark to you, you would not have pursued the matter any further.
I would not describe what she said as ambiguous.
No? Then let us return to the conversation you had with Mrs. Parker that morning. Did she at any time admit to having murdered her husband?
No, ma'am.
Did she in fact admit to anything more than that she thought the doctor might suspect her of it?
I didn't understand that to be what she was saying.
Then what did you understand her to be saying?
Simply that she had something on her mind and she assumed I knew what it was.
But it would be quite consistent with her words, would it not, Inspector, to interpret them as meaning that what she had on her mind was not guilt for her husband's murder, but the fear of an innocent woman that she might be wrongly accused of it.
That is possible, yes.
Possible. Thank you, Inspector. How did you find it?
On my way to the pictures the other night, past an estate agent's window. Desirable country property, it said. Needs some modernization, it said. Come on, I'll show you around. I hope that door's not locked. You'll have to be careful, because everything's covered in dust. I dashed up for a quick look at lunchtime.
I wondered where you were. Rounding up his stray witness, I thought.
Ho, ho, ho. When you mentioned that woman to me, she probably got on the wrong train deliberately, and I'm sure as hell she doesn't want to give any evidence, except maybe on your side.
I think I'm going to like her.
But everything she knows seems to be on my side.
That is unfortunate.
Let's hope so. No. Those stairs are a bit dodgy. Let me go first. It's better if you walk on the very edges. Do you know, if I buy this place, I think I'll make the living room up here. Of course, I shall have to knock down a wall.
Down a wall?
Lift the roof.
Lift the roof.
And then I might build out a bit to the west. Of course, the view's marvellous.
Why not add a clock tower while you're about it?
No.
Oh.
There. But you can see the possibilities, can't you? I mean, with the staircase coming right up and that wall gone, all sort of open plan.
Oh. Is this the west?
Yes.
At least you're right about the view.
You just come for the weekend, when it's all finished. In about 10 years.
Only if there's something to sit on by then.
What's wrong with the stairs?
A great deal. One thing you should do, get Sir John to help you with some landscape gardening.
I'd love to see him in a pair of gum-boots.
Not a hope. His talents are strictly supervisory, but he's very expert.
Yes, I know. I've seen his own garden.
I keep forgetting you've known him longer than any of us.
Let me go first. Well, not exactly known him. I first met him when I was working for Bar Finals. He adjudicated in a mock trial. Hang on. There. I played the scene in a school pageant once. Better?
Better?
I think so. Isn't it? It was Gallagher who persuaded me to go through with it, the law.
You mean you haven't always been the keen young barrister we all know and love?
Well, I was toying with the idea of becoming Scott Fitzgerald, with just a dash of Graham Greene thrown in for good measure.
How did he talk you out of that?
He mentioned money. He predicted that by the time I was 35, I'd be earning £15,000 a year.
Obviously testing your moral fibre.
Did I pass or fail?
At least you proved him right about the money.
Yeah. Mind you, I still have a desk full of opening chapters. Do you know, one day, I might just drop out, the law, everything. Settle somewhere like this. Write the great book.
After you've installed central heating and several impressionists.
Please, God, make me virtuous, but not just yet. Come on. We'd better make a move if we're going to earn any more of those highly inflated refreshers tomorrow. Thank you. You know, I think I will buy this place. Just so I know it's here.
Glover, you have given evidence for the prosecution.
Much against my will. I'd like to make that plain.
Nevertheless, Mrs.
Don't
Glover...
you worry, Mrs. Parker, dear. It'll all be all right, just you see.
Mrs. Glover, you must not address the accused in that or in any other way.
I'm sorry, Your Grace. I was only trying to offer a crumb of comfort to the poor woman.
It is not your job to do so, Mrs. Glover. You are here to give evidence and for no other reason.
Against my better judgment. I'm doing it under distress.
Carry on, Miss Peterson. Best you can.
Mrs. Glover, you have told the court about the warning Dr. Lomax gave to Mrs. Parker in your presence.
That's right. About the medicine the old fellow was taking.
Do you remember the precise details of that warning?
Now, that I don't. No. I remember Mrs. Parker asking the doctor to write it down, but he said he was a busy man and had other patients to see, and she could write it down herself if she was uncertain.
Did she write it down?
No, we refused to wait while she found a pencil.
And you don't remember any details of what Mr. Parker was not allowed to eat or drink?
Ah, now that I do remember. He was to stay off the drink. Yes, that I remember, the drink.
And that's all?
Well, it was nothing concerning me, you understand. It was only that I happened to be washing the floor that I heard anything. But I do remember thinking, if he's off the drink, it'll not help his temper.
Mr. Parker's temper was unpredictable, was it?
He was a difficult man, rest his soul. But he was a sick man, so you made allowances.
Did Mrs. Parker's behaviour towards her husband strike you as that of a good and dutiful wife?
That it did. She had the patience of a saint, and generous to a fault.
Generous towards her husband?
Well, towards him and all who needed it. The stories I could tell, she doesn't even know I overheard.
Perhaps we shouldn't go into that.
But what about that poor man? And a friend of her husband's, too. That poor Mr. Manners. You ask Ronnie Manners what she did to get him out of trouble. And all from the goodness of her heart. You ask Ronnie Manners.
Thank you, Mrs. Glover. No further questions.
Mr. Eliot?
Yes, my lord. Several further questions. Mrs. Glover, this Ronnie Manners.
Winkle it out. She handed it to you on a plate.
I'm amazed she didn't hand it to the police in the first place.
That's not much consolation.
Listen, Harriet. There's something you must know. Inspector Collins got to work straight away yesterday. Now, he's not only got hold of Ronnie Manners, but he has a complete record of all their financial transactions.
And?
Collins says it smells all wrong. Parker owned some property, just a few houses in the town. They were managed for him by a firm of estate agents for which Manners worked. He used to come to him regularly to have him sign whatever documents needed signing, make reports, etc. Anyway, as Parker became more unwell, he began to lose his grip, and his wife was empowered to sign documents for him. That's how they did it. Thank you. They sued him for £2,000 during the last 6 months of his life. And immediately the old man died, she made over a lump sum of £5,000 to Mr. Manners.
I know about the 5,000.
And the rest? I see. Well, I thought you should know. It's better than having it sprung on you in open court. And it gives you time to have your client change her plea.
You should have told me the truth.
I did. I said I gave him £5,000.
And the 2,000 before that?
I was authorised to make decisions affecting my husband's interests.
Did you tell him what you were doing?
No. If only that silly woman
It's
hadn't...
no good blaming Mrs. Glover. She thought she was helping you.
But how did she know about Ronnie and me?
She never suspected you were having an affair. What she did find out, over here, was that somehow you'd found the money to pay off his gambling debts. To her, it was simple generosity, which is not what the jury will think.
I know.
Mrs. Parker, I'm bound to say that the prosecution's case has been greatly strengthened by this evidence. The jury will very probably return a verdict of guilty. In view of that, we must consider whether you should change your plea.
No. I'm sorry, I won't. Ronnie and I, he's a gentle, kind man. He needs someone. We were going to be married. Let's leave it, we said, about
None
him.
of that improves your chance of an acquittal.
But there is a chance, isn't there? Surely there must be some chance.
There's always a chance, but it's not a good one. I advise a plea of guilty and let me do what I can in mitigation.
No. You see, standing up in court and saying, yes, I did it, I'm a murderer, seems so much worse. Worse even than being convicted. Even if they do say I'm guilty, he won't believe them. Ronnie, he'll stand by me.
I can't remember when I first told her about my debts.
Roughly.
About 4 months after.
After you became lovers?
Yes.
Why did she offer to give you the money?
She said she wanted to help. I didn't ask her. I never asked for money.
Did you discuss ways of raising the money?
Yes.
And whose idea was it to raise the first 2,000 in the way that you did?
Well, both of us.
Did you discuss consulting Mr. Parker?
No. That would have been pointless.
So, as far as you are aware, Mr. Parker remained in ignorance of the arrangement between his wife and yourself?
She said she didn't want to worry me about him. She said she'd take care of it.
And what did you understand her to mean by that?
I assume she meant keep him in the dark.
Ah. Did you discuss the possibility of marriage with Mrs. Parker?
Is that... do I have to...
Yes, Mr. Manners, you will answer the question.
We talked about it, just as a possibility.
Did you discuss it before her husband's death?
I think we touched on it, yes.
And how did you both feel about it?
Just as a possibility.
Mr. Manners, did you ever...
Another delay?
I beg your lordship's pardon. Something, in fact, very much to the point.
Yes.
Mr. Manners, what was the sum total of the debt that Mrs. Parker paid off for you?
Several £1,000.
Could you be more precise?
Not offhand, no.
Did the debt, in fact, exceed the sum of £1,800?
No.
Then for what reason did Mrs. Parker pay to you the sum of £5,000 immediately after her husband's death?
I told her I wanted it for the rest of the debt.
Was that, in fact, the case?
I used the money as a deposit on a house. My wife had left me.
Your wife? But do I understand you are already married, Mr. Manners?
My wife left me 18 months ago. She took our boy with her. He's 9 years old. She said if I couldn't give up gambling, provide a decent home, she'd never come back. I needed £5,000.
My lord, in view of this new evidence, may I have a few moments to consult with my client?
Yes, Miss Peterson. I will adjourn for 15 minutes.
You've had a dreadful shock, I know, and I'm sorry. But what we have to think about is your situation. I'd say your chances of acquittal have improved considerably. There's still not 1 ounce of proof you intended to kill your husband. All that Manners' evidence has done is win you the jury's sympathy. And unless I'm very much mistaken, the judge's too. When you step into that witness box...
No.
No? I don't understand.
I'm not going to give evidence.
But you've nothing to fear now. You can be perfectly open. Admit you were taken in by Manners.
Acquittal by vote of sympathy. No, thank you very much. I don't want that.
What we both want is a verdict of not guilty. How we get it is my business, so please, do as I ask.
No. I did it, Miss Peterson. Quite deliberately, I murdered my husband. I knew what I was doing. I'd planned it for weeks. I just waited for the day he'd asked for an extra tablet. That was my chance. A piece of Stilton. He used to love Stilton. I thought he'll be bound to make a pig of himself. Once I made up my mind, I just waited. I just thought of the future. With Ronnie.
Mrs. Parker, you're distraught. I'm going to ask for a further adjournment.
I'm perfectly all right.
If what you've said is true, and I say if, why have you only chosen to tell me now?
Because I want him, Ronnie, to know just how much this house for her, for his wife, has cost. I want to rub his nose in it.
All right. We go on as before. I won't call you, so it'll
You
be up
don't
to
understand. I want to plead guilty. I want him to know. I'm going to make that man remember me for the rest of his life.
Congratulations.
For what?
Your speech in mitigation. Oh, brilliant.
Thanks. She's still got life.
Well, with a review, it could be as little as 6 years.
6 years won't make any mark on that man's conscience. It's a totally futile gesture.
You still don't believe she was guilty, do you?
Guilty or innocent, James, it's none of our business. Thank God.